it's kind of been a journey, working through our intervention and really getting down to, are we respecting people? Are we respecting ideas? And are we maintaining integrity during this whole process? Um, what makes this idea feasible as a small pilot at UVU? Is it doable at all, and why?
Well, first off, we kind of have this low friction deployment. It's a web-based app, so anyone essentially can access it. And it kind of avoids those barriers that you might have to be. You might have a certain physical objects where you have to purchase them or you have to acquire them by going to some place.
Mm-hmm.
And then we kind of have this ecosystem of integration, especially with UVU's, the Center for Social Impact. They have that relational care, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, starting out from the self and working out towards systems is very much involved in our program, and it exists already. So it's not too hard to integrate there at all. Especially with the incentives of food vouchers
Right.
and snacks.
Mm-hmm.
People love snacks. And so not difficult to do at all, especially when we're starting off on the individual level like we are.
Mm-hmm. And obviously at UVU, we have these kind of targeted contexts where we have the high traffic zones, like the LA building or the Hall of Flags. And we also have programs such as the UVU's first year experiences courses, which allow us to kind of directly reach students when they're kind of shaping their ideas and their foundations and values.
Mm-hmm.
And then we also kind of have this small financial requirement at most, $600, and that's just for initial API and marketing costs.
Mm-hmm.
And kind of that, makes it somewhat low risk and high reward for campus partners.
Absolutely. But that does bring to mind that, it's all sounds great, like sign me up. But what barriers might arise and how might we address them?
I think one of the first foremost things is just the wordiness
Yeah.
fatigue. I know when I was reading some of the prompts, it was really hard. They would throw out something about, I want to say border control and all these factors, and then me just reading that, I was like, I don't know.
Yeah.
Kind of
Yeah.
makes you want to give up.
Yeah.
And then I think with that, what we kind of found was that prompt coaching or concise coaching constraint that we put into the AI, which was, the limiting word count, and then kind of the more text message style bursts that it gives. And then another one was that metric transparency. So we had our peace and accuracy scores, which to us, while making it make complete
super
sense.
intuitive. Everyone
Yeah.
should know this. Yeah. Yeah.
But we found through user testing that, people don't know what that means.
Mm-hmm.
For them, it's just, a number and a score.
Yeah.
And kind of taking that a step further and explaining, I think kind of helps remove that black box feeling of that you get with AI.
Yeah.
And then the other, or kind of the final one, is the cost scaling. So, as AI tokens grow with more popularity, I think it's obviously not kind of feasible to keep going potentially with ChatGPT 5 or Gemini like we use now.
Yeah.
But I think what we address explicitly in our phase 4 of our timeline is kind of using that small language model.
Yeah.
And I think that would be really great, especially with UVU, where we have computer science programs, electrical engineers, where we could potentially host something like that on our own servers, removing those external API fees.
Yeah, especially with our relationships with current partners in that space.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Then kind of onto our next question, what key ethical risks should we be mindful of? Examples being burdens placed on others, identities, safety, emotional vulnerability.
Yeah. We're human beings, and we're in this AI revolution, and we constantly want to push its limits. By having Ollie as a non-human, it can make it easy to reinforce harm speech because we feel like it's low risk and doesn't have an effect. We recognize this pretty early on, and so we have our off-ramp where it says, take a breath, you're in timeout basically, and really reflect on what the prompts are saying and have an opportunity for journaling, which mitigates that risk of validating harmful or extremist views a little bit, because we don't want at all to endorse any harmful views. And as much as we want to challenge views, reinforcing all those like hate speech and violence, it's nice that we can intervene with that off-ramp, especially with the journal prompts. So that's like a major risk. Another risk is this idea of empathy and the burden of empathy, that sometimes marginalized groups often carry this emotional labor of bridging, that we feel like, oh, because I have experienced this and I have been discriminated against, then it is my job to do this bridging. How we're trying to mitigate that is that ensure that OLLI or our interface is framed as a self-protection and de-escalation tool for the user's own peace of mind, rather than kind of, okay, well now you're prepared to get into the next fight. And it's this whole idea of protecting yourself, again, this relational care aspect of things. It's starting from the self into our relationship with others, our communities, and then the system at large. Removing that burden of empathy to just stay in fight mode. The other kind of risk that we have is this cancel culture environment that we live in makes it hard for people to feel safe in their identity. We fear judgment, especially judgment from others, and especially when it affects our standard of living or our lifestyle with those we interact with, especially at school. And so this can be pretty messy, and how we plan to mitigate this risk is with total anonymity. And so practice logs are never tied to student IDs. In fact, they won't be saved to our servers. They'll all be saved on personal computers. All we will be able to see on our back end is this kind of progression of scores, how people are doing on their peace and accuracy scores, and how often are they interacting with the interface. Everything else, all the prompt data, all the journal entries are all saved locally on the user's device.
And that kind of leaves our last question. So how would we ensure that this idea strengthens trust and belonging rather than inevitably harming it?
Yeah, I think a big thing out of all of this is showing that OLLI isn't a conservative. OLLI isn't a liberal. OLLI is a neutral party that is there to help you hone your skills of reframing, increase your confidence, and allow a neutral ground for students to interact with ideas that they might not have the opportunity to or be willing to in more public settings. And then the other thing that I know can be hard, and this was brought up in our interviews, is that sometimes in our media or in our schools, we're given this like high class, heavy language to discuss political issues. But by maintaining a simple, clean-cut, accessible language within our framework, we'll be opening up doors to people who would have otherwise been excluded. And maintaining this kind of epistemic humility that, this knowledge doesn't have to be super complicated in order for you to really understand majorly complex issues. But each person with a brain, each person with a heart can tackle these issues in a meaningful, valuable way. And that, to me, is at the core of our strength and at the core of building trust within our community and belonging.